Cyrene's first rerun banner is finally here, and a decent amount has changed for the Chrysos Heirs since Cyrene's first run, which of course directly impacts Cyrene. After all, while Cyrene can see some use outside of the Chrysos Heirs, she is mainly the dedicated Chrysos Heir buffer, and if you're looking to pull Cyrene, it's probably going to be for one of them. I've done Cyrene banner advice videos in the past during her first run, so we're going to copy the format I did previously and just do a tier list of the Chrysos Heirs to sort through whether or not Cyrene is a worthwhile pull for each of them. Let's start from the beginning of Amphorius, the very first Chrysos Heir, Aglaea. Let's be honest, not all of Cyrene's Chrysos Heir buffs are created equally. Some of them are clearly just more overloaded than others, arguably because some of the Chrysos Heirs need their buffs to be more overloaded. And Aglaea is definitely one of those characters. She gets damage bonus, defense ignore, energy, max stacks of her speed talent. At this rate, Cyrene might as well give Aglaea some extra fries to go along with it. With how much Cyrene is giving Aglaea, it's no surprise that she was definitively Aglaea's best teammate when she first released, and not too much has changed for Aglaea since then. Hoyo has been much more focused on newer archetypes, so a more generic hypercarry like Aglaea hasn't received much in the way of new supports that could replace Cyrene for her. However, while things haven't changed much for Aglaea yet, there is something creeping on the horizon that could change things for Aglaea and Cyrene. There are rumors floating around about a potential Sunday Nova Flare on the horizon. We don't know when it's coming, if it even is coming, or how much it'll impact Sunday and Aglaea, but if it is true, then Aglaea is obviously one of the first DPSs who would look to benefit from a Sunday Nova Flare. Back in the pre-Cyrene days, Aglaea was the character that was arguably the most reliant on Sunday. So a resurgence of the Aglaea Sunday team-up would make a lot of sense if Sunday is indeed on the Nova Flare list. And it could very well cause Cyrene to lose her current high priority status on an Aglaea team. Of course, I'm not suggesting Cyrene would become bad in an Aglaea team. In fact, pairing up Cyrene with Sunday on an Aglaea team has always been a fairly effective way to play Aglaea, despite Sunday not being a Chrysos Heir. So a Sunday Nova Flare could very well just make him work even better with Cyrene. Rest assured, Aglaea is not going on any of the bottom tiers on this Cyrene pulling list. If the possibility of a Sunday Nova Flare was the only thing to take into consideration, I would probably still place Aglaea straight into the always pull Cyrene tier. However, even back during Cyrene's first rerun, Aglaea was in a weird spot where she still really wanted her own personal vertical investments, at least the early ones, like her E1 and S1, before you pulled Cyrene for her, mainly just because Aglaea doesn't have a Ceredra or an Evernight or any third support who is tying in any extra synergy between Aglaea and Cyrene, meaning Aglaea was sort of just stuck using the general supports of Tribi or RMC or Cypher, or again, even Sunday, alongside Cyrene. On top of this, Aglaea's best non-Cyrene teammates, like Robin and Huohuo, are now in the Golden Companion shop for free. Even with all these caveats, Cyrene is still a high priority pull for Aglaea, but I'm going to be placing Aglaea into the final puzzle piece tier to respect the power of Aglaea's other investment necessities before pulling Cyrene. Of course, this is going to bring me to another point, and that is, a lot of the Chrysos Heirs aren't exactly characters that I would recommend investing into in today's day and age. Obviously, with enough investment, they'll be able to clear content just fine, but the opportunity cost is just usually not worth it when you could instead invest into a modern character. Don't get me wrong, I personally love all of the Chrysos Heirs, and they are some of my favorite characters in the entire game, but would you really invest into the likes of Aglaea or Mydei when modern characters like Ashvale and Elation Teams and Himiko Nova are currently getting released? It's not the Chrysos Heirs' fault, of course, but this is just the nature of power creep in Honkai Star Rail. Due to this, Cyrene's pull value has definitely fallen off quite a bit due to half of her DPSs and teams just not being characters that I would really recommend investing into nowadays. However, if you just really love the Chrysos Heirs and want to keep playing a specific one, and you want to know if Cyrene is worth it for your favorite, then that's completely valid, and we'll keep going down the list. Just keep in mind that pulling Cyrene for some of these characters might not be the most optimal use of your pulls for clearing endgame, not because Cyrene isn't worth it, but because the DPS in question is outdated compared to more modern DPSs. Anyway, after Aglaea, we go straight to Mydei, obviously skipping over any supports like Tribi, since you're never pulling Cyrene just for a support. Mydei was always one of the characters who benefited the most from Cyrene, and that has definitely not changed. The free Godslayer that Cyrene provides is just not something other supports can really replicate for Mydei, especially since Cyrene gives you control over when you unleash it. Playing Mydei with and without Cyrene feels like a night and day difference, and he is definitely going to be our first Chrysos Heir to go in the always pull Cyrene tier. Once again, Mydei isn't necessarily a character that I recommend investing into nowadays, but if you are a Mydei stan who refuses to let him go, then I would definitely always recommend Cyrene to you, under the caveat that you'll most likely also want Hysilens. After Mydei, we have Castorice, the ringleader of the infamous Mono Remembrance team. Cyrene has always been the last puzzle piece in Castorice's teams. Hysilens and Evernight are the ones that really make the largest difference for Castorice. This has never been more apparent than in recent Anomaly Arbitration concentration stages, where follow-up attack shilling has caused Castorice to garner better results by replacing Cyrene with Tribi or Mortonak's Blade. Don't get me wrong, Cyrene is still generally going to be the strongest option for Castorice outside of stages that are specifically anti-shilling Cyrene, but it is not by a huge margin. As if that wasn't enough, there are rumors that a new teammate for the Remembrance team is on the horizon, apparently a new version of Robin. There has been a lot of conflicting info on who exactly Robin is meant to replace in the Remembrance team, with Castorice actually being the one potentially on the chopping block. But there's definitely a possibility where Cyrene is the one who gets removed instead. Theoretically, Cyrene should be the easiest one to replace in a Castorice team specifically, assuming Robin is strong enough to earn herself a slot on the team, since Cyrene's buff for Castorice is nothing crazy outside of single target scenarios, and it's mainly Cyrene's synergy with the rest of Castorice's teammates that really rounds out their team. All this Robin talk is pure speculation, of course, similarly to the Sunday Nova Flare speculations, so I'm not going to rate the Castorice and Cyrene synergy too harshly just because of the rumors about Robin, but it is something I would advise you to keep in mind. Unfortunately, we will not have Robin's kit until after Cyrene's rerun is already gone. So, with all of these things taken into account, Castorice is going right next to the other Remembrance DPS and having Cyrene as the final puzzle piece. This one applies even more to Castorice, since assembling the full mono rem team really does feel like building a puzzle, with Cyrene being the final piece. Cyrene even references this in her trailer. After Castorice, we have Anaxa, who is another one of those characters who has a super overloaded Cyrene buff, an action advance, skill point generation, attack and damage percent, and bonus hits of his skill, which equates to bonus multipliers. Cyrene just gives Anaxa so much. On top of this, the synergy between Cyrene and Ceridra, allowing Anaxa to cheat out so much extra damage on every Ceridra double skill, just skyrockets Cyrene's value for Anaxa even more. Ceridra's existence acts as the glue that a character like Aglaea was missing, rounding out the synergy between Cyrene and Anaxa. You could argue that the three-way synergy between Anaxa, Ceridra, and Cyrene should land Anaxa in the final puzzle piece tier, but honestly, the team isn't that bad using RMC instead of Ceridra, and you will really feel the difference playing Anaxa with Cyrene versus without Cyrene. Anaxa himself may not have the best eidolons, thus making it a bit suspicious to still be investing further into him in today's day and age, but if you still want to play Anaxa, then you should always pull Cyrene. The patch 3.3 characters, Cypher and Hysilens, obviously aren't relevant to this discussion, so let's jump straight to Cyrene's BFF, Phainon. Phainon is probably the one who has gone through the most changes since Cyrene's first rerun, and that's due to the release of Sparkle's Nova Flare, which was given away for free. Sparkle being such a powerful free character who offers massive buffs to Phainon in exchange for bringing less comfort than Cyrene, completely warped Phainon's pulling priorities in terms of supports. I have a full video specifically dedicated to Phainon for his own rerun banner, so I would watch that video for a more in-depth analysis on Phainon's pulling priorities. But basically, while Cyrene is still a very good support for Phainon, she's generally just a side grade that offers more comfort, especially in longer fights. And her big power spike over other Phainon supports mainly comes in the form of her E2, which honestly sometimes feels like it was made specifically with Phainon in mind. Cyrene's E2 is strong in general for all of her teams, of course, drastically reducing her ramp-up time and front-loading your damage instead of backloading it, but the reliance on her E2 for her to be a noticeable upgrade for Phainon nowadays, especially in comparison to Phainon's cheaper teams, makes Phainon the sole occupant of the E2 merchant tier. Again, if you already have Cyrene for Phainon, the team works perfectly fine, but since this is Cyrene's rerun banner, I would only actively recommend pulling her for Phainon if you're willing to go all the way to her E2 breakpoint. Next up is Hysilens, and while DOT Cyrene teams had their time in the limelight, Black Swan's Nova Flare has mostly killed Cyrene in DOT teams outside of sustainless stuff. If Cyrene is all you have for your last slot with Hysilens and Kafka, then she's still functional in those teams, of course, but you would much rather just have the full DOT trio instead. At the very least, I would never recommend pulling Cyrene specifically to play her with Hysilens, so Hysilens is going straight into the bottom tier. And finally, we reach the last Chrysos Heir DPS to release, Evernight. Evernight is similar to Castorice, only she has less caveats. For starters, part of the reason Cyrene is good in Castorice teams to begin with is solely because of the synergy between Cyrene and Evernight, and how much these two buff each other's damage. Pairing these two up is just super strong in general, so it's a no-brainer that Cyrene is going to be glued to Evernight if you're trying to play Evernight as a main DPS without Castorice. There is still the ever-looming Robin rumor, and the rumors have been hinting pretty hard at Robin specifically being a support for Evernight more than any of the other Remembrance characters, but it is just very difficult to imagine a world where Cyrene is the one getting replaced for main DPS Evernight. If anything, the other support slot, whether it be RMC or Tribi or Castorice if it's a Castorice team, should be the easier character for Robin to replace if the goal is to focus on Evernight's damage. There is also the possibility that Robin opens up new teams for Evernight entirely, such as somehow offering some synergy between Evernight and Himiko Nova, but all of that that would be pure speculation, working off of basically no knowledge. So if we just stick to the present and we just look at what is best for a main DPS Evernight here and now, Evernight definitely belongs in the always pull Cyrene tier. I think you could argue E2 Evernight is still the most important thing for main DPS Evernight, and thus she should be on the same level as Aglaea, who also has a heavy incentive to pull for her own vertical investments before Cyrene. But I just think the difference is that Aglaea feels more reliant on her vertical investments compared to Evernight. Lastly, Cyrene can technically be played in teams outside of the Chrysos Heirs, specifically with ultimate reliant DPSs like Saber or Evanescia, but since I would never recommend pulling Cyrene specifically for these use cases, they aren't going to make the list. These are more so scenarios where if you already have Cyrene, or you want Cyrene for one of the Chrysos Heirs on this list, and you also happen to have Saber or Evanescia or any other non-Chrysos Heir who can make use of Cyrene, then you have the option to play Cyrene there. It should never be your main pulling intent to pull Cyrene to use her outside of a Chrysos Heir team though. And with that, this is my tier list of each of the Chrysos Heirs and how badly you should consider pulling on Cyrene's Rerun banner for each of them, assuming they are your main DPS who you want to invest into long term. In truth, as I stated earlier, most of the characters on this list are not characters I would actually recommend pulling in today's day and age, especially with such powerful newer characters on the horizon like Himiko Nova. But meta is obviously not the end all be all. In a way, you could say Cyrene herself is nowhere near as worth it nowadays due to how her DPSs have all aged, especially if you're looking to build one of these teams from scratch, as in you literally don't own any of these characters needed for these teams, and you would need to pull multiple characters. If you're in a scenario like this, then Cyrene is definitely pretty hard to recommend, so just make sure you know what you're getting into if you're pulling for a DPS and team that might not be keeping up with the ever-rampant power creep in Honkai Star Rail. So, what are your plans for Cyrene and Phainon's Rerun banner? Are you still looking to invest into any of the Chrysos Heirs, or are your pulling plans looking at the future? Let me know in the comments below, and like the video if you found it helpful or enjoyable at all. There are always new characters on the horizon, and I will always cover them here on the channel, so consider subscribing so you don't miss out on that. Thank you so much for watching, and with all of that said, until next time!